What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and before we start today's video, I want to show you guys something.
But I guess I'd say, if it is just us, it seems like an awful waste of space.
The shop at home we serve the web, but at the same time, we feel emptier, lonelier, and more cut off from each other than at any other time in history. We're kind of synthesized society.
You know, I never realized how awesome the Mavic 2 is. I'm still figuring out color correction. Those of you guys who watch the video, you guys probably know it's a little grainy. I haven't quite figured out color correction yet. In all honesty, I'm brand new to color correction. Never really had a reason to do it before. I mean, I guess shooting raw maybe when I was using the Blackmagic, but that thing was painfully unreliable, so I just said the heck with it. But in this video, I want to talk about reality and fantasy, right? So a little bit of history here. This is a comic called The Century. But if you look up here, you'll see that it says Marvel Knights. The reason why that says Marvel Knights is because in the late 90s, Marvel, as most people know, was on the verge of bankruptcy, right? Like they were gonna lose everything. DC was owned by Warner Brothers. When the whole comic books happened in the 90s, DC was basically safe, but there was nobody to really save Marvel. They'd long since been sold by Cadence Industries, and they were essentially just kind of free-floating. Eventually, they were bought out by Toy Biz with Avi Arad and Ike Perlmutter, and those are the guys who essentially kind of pushed the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, and of course, we know where that led to with Avengers Endgame at the time of this recording is 2 days out or something like that. So it was turned into like a monumental success. But because of the fact that Marvel was almost broke, what they had to do is they essentially had to find a way to release comics in an exceedingly cheap way. And so around that time, two guys by the name of Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada had a company called Event Publishing. And so what Marvel did is they essentially licensed their characters to Event Publishing, who in turn created stories. And that's why you'll see things like Marvel Knights Black Panther, Marvel Knights Daredevil, Marvel Knights The Punisher. There was an actual team called Marvel Knights later on down the line. But if you see that Marvel Knights imprint on a particular comic book, it means it's not actually created by Marvel proper, it was created by Event Publishing on behalf of Marvel. But in addition to releasing stories on existing characters, Event Publishing also created new characters, and one of them is the Sentry. Now, the original miniseries by Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee was actually really, really fascinating, because what it did is it kind of toyed with the idea that Robert Reynolds was a schizophrenic. When you read this first issue, it is wholly ambiguous, right? Like it's exceedingly mysterious. Like he wakes up in the middle of the night and basically says the Void's back, this evil being, the Void is back. You know, and from the conversation with his wife, Lindy, as well as, you know, the fact that he goes for a book, and when he opens the book up, it contains a bottle, which is more or less alluded to being alcohol, although Robert Reynolds refers to it as his super formula that makes him the Sentry, that as he goes through this and he muses to himself, basically, he seems like a man that has a disconnect from reality. He's a schizophrenic guy who basically looks to the world of superheroes and believes that he is one. And so as you go through this, there's a point where like the dog starts talking to him in this kind of demonic voice, again, kind of a note of schizophrenia. And the overall gist of this is that while he does suffer from that particular mental illness, or at least that seems to be the case, he basically self-medicates by consuming alcohol. And as you go through, as things get more and more mysterious, they get a little more and more ambiguous, you find out there's actually a lot going on in this particular story than you were initially led to believe in the first issue. But one of the things that's so intriguing, one of the reasons why it really kind of ends on the note that perhaps he really is schizophrenic, is he goes to the closet. After his wife leaves him when he hits the dog, he goes to the closet and he basically takes out this coat. He puts this coat on, then he takes clothespins and attaches a sheet to his back, and basically kind of like a makeshift superhero costume, something that you would expect to see from a 4 or 5-year-old on Halloween. And he muses to himself. He says, "God, you think, it feels good to put on the old suit again. The Sentry signal, your people haven't forgotten you, they need you. It's a bolt of lightning that basically strikes in the distance. Once more into the breach for humanity's sake. Once more, the Sentry. Now is a time for vigilance." And essentially, he just kind of goes forward, sort of walks out into the world, believing he's a superhero. Now, as you go on throughout the story, again, you find out there's a lot more going on. I would highly suggest you read it. I mean, the art in this is actually really, really funky. It's really, really cool. That's a Godzilla poster. But the art in this is intriguing. Let's find a full page, a whole spread where we can kind of get a better idea of what the art's like in this particular story. That's a throwback page. God, I keep forgetting how many ads there were in Marvel Comics back in the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. Technically, the story was released in the year 2000, but this right there. You know, look how funky that art is. That's actually Jay Lee art, which is really intriguing. But nonetheless, the reason why the Sentry always resonated with me, the reason why the Sentry was always intriguing to me, what's going on, sweetheart? Mariah just got home. I left you something on the dining room table. So the cool thing, the reason why the Sentry was so intriguing to me is because, it was kind of this answer to the question, does he, or I guess, what would happen if a person had schizophrenia and believed they were a hero? But the overall gist of this video is that while a huge percent of the population, 90% or better, does not suffer from schizophrenia, it doesn't change the fact that I have to believe there's a big percentage of society that has a difficult time understanding the difference between reality and fantasy. And the reason why is because in this world that we live in, for a lot of you young people in this world that we live in, you're bombarded by all sides from social media, right? Like YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and they're constantly trying to divert your attention, right? Constantly saying like, focus on me. But because of the fact that the world that you live in is this kind of hodgepodge intermingling of social media lives versus real and tangible lives, it can be difficult to tell the difference. But more so than that, it's the things that we choose to focus on. It's the things that we choose to pay attention to. Not everything that goes on in the world is real, and not everything that we perceive is actually happening the way that we think it's happening. That oftentimes our minds will lie to us. Our eyes will lie to us. They'll convince us things are a certain way when they're not. And it's so wild because this impacts people in so many different ways, right? It impacts people in like marriages. It impacts people on their jobs. It impacts people in their social interactions with friends, that we're what we do is we basically take all of our past experiences and we bring them all to the table. And sometimes that can cloud our judgment. It can cloud our judgment on the job, right? I mean, if you're a person that's routinely worked terrible jobs or routinely worked amazing jobs, it can change your perspective on how the world works. One of the big talking points that people have with that is like millennials, right? Like college graduates. They basically say, hey, look, these millennials are walking around and they're pissed off because they can't find work. And the argument they make is, well, I was told if I got a college degree that I would have a job. And there is merit to that argument. But the counter argument that's made is, did an employer tell you that? If you didn't sign a contract with an employer to have a job when you got out of college, then you have no argument. Somebody somewhere out there in the world, a parent or someone who had no influence over whether or not you could get a job, told you you would have one when you got out of college. But there's kind of arguments on both sides, right? Like, it was a societal standard. It was a societal rule. Society said this would happen. And by good faith, young people followed that advice, and it turned out that they were essentially led down the primrose path, right? Like, a lot of them were arguing that it was this kind of you know, what's that turn of phrase? I can't remember what it's called. It's bait and switch. You know, they kind of argue something like that. But regardless of the circumstance, one of the things that I kind of what I want to communicate in this video is, do not let your mind get the best of you, right? Like, your brain serves a purpose, and it's to maintain the functions of your body. Everything else are just thoughts. And what you have to do is you have to be able to sit down and differentiate between what's real and what's not. And you have to be able to differentiate between what your brain is telling you is real and what your brain is telling you is not, and then compare that to what actually is real and it is not. Otherwise, you'll find yourself tripping over your own thoughts. You'll find yourself tripping in your own head. And the result is that you'll end up, you know, creating problems for yourself, right? If you're a person that's never had anything but great experiences on the job, and then you go into a job and you have a bad experience, you won't know how to cope because you've never experienced that before. But again, I'm kind of digressing here, and I'm kind of getting caught up on myself. Again, the overall message is, sometimes you just got to get your brain out of the way. Like, sometimes you just got to tell your brain, move, and go forward accordingly. Because I'm a victim of that, guys. I've been down that road before. Like, I really have. You know, and I bring my own experiences to that when it comes to all manner of situations. I bring my past experiences when it comes to Mariah, and there's been circumstances where I've perceived things a certain way, and it's not that way. But because of the fact that I had these past experiences, it sort of, you know, influences my decision making, if not taints it. And then in turn, like, I have to sort of cope with that, go to her and talk to her about it, or deal with it on my own. But again, you know, it's the world is a finicky place. The world's a crazy place, but it's got nothing on the brain that we have rattling around in this head. You know, it's kind of nuts. You know, it's for all the potential that humanity has, for all the things that we could achieve, you know, by utilizing our brain to its maximum capacity, it sure does cause us a lot of grief. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.